So on garbage day several months ago, I salvaged this tabletop for the lumber. Solid maple, baby. I took one of the leaves and I ran it over the jointer, and that's how I'm pretty sure this is solid maple, because it's really got the look of the grain and the color. And of course the leaves are rectangular, so it's easy for me to find something to do with them. But the curved top is another matter. I was kind of worried that I'd end up wasting a bunch of this wood, which is silly because I know it was free. But still, I'm going to make a small picture frame right now, which is a perfect opportunity for me to try to rip some strips from here along the edge, which should leave me with a pretty nice big chunk of wood that I can use for something else. The inside edge is a bit grungy, so I'm going to first run it over the jointer to clean these up, which will then give me something nice and straight for running along the table saw fence for when I rip it into strips. Just like that. So for my picture frame, I want one piece that's at least 14 inches, and then the next piece that'll be 20. And then 2 inches wide. So I'm thinking if I cut roughly at this point, that'll give me something well over 14 inches, and then even at this end it'll be 2 inches. So I'm going to set my table saw to cut at 18 inches. And I'll do that on both of the pieces, so I start with the smallest on both. So now if I take my cut off, and I'll just use my tape here to say, okay, there I can do 2 inches, and then I'll go over to this end. Where can I get 2 inches? Right about there. And if I measure between those lines, I've got 14 3/4 roughly, so that's good. So now I'm going to cut the other one to match. And now with the first two pieces cut, I'm going to reset the table saw fence, this time to the 2 inches that I want. And I'll rip these two down, and I'll also still rip the tabletop so that I'll have the four pieces that I need. And actually I'll probably rip it a fifth time so I have a spare. It's always good to have a spare. So that gives me the 4 pieces that I need, plus one extra. And they were ripped out of the most useless part of that board that I had. So now I have some big planks that are still left over that I can use for another project. I think my wife wants some shelves. Next, I'm going to run them through the planer, taking some really light passes because I just want to take off the old finish so I'm left with bare wood. That's definitely maple. Nicely took off the finish. Now I can get on with things. And I've still got just a bit over 3/4 of an inch to work with, which is beautiful. So the client's looking for a fairly simple frame. So if you look at the frame in cross section, something like this, and we're probably going to have a small chamfer on the inside, and then a fairly deep rabbet like that to receive the picture. So then the picture would go here. I'm going to cut this large rabbet out first, and I'm going to do that on the table saw. Now, I have an older table saw, so I don't have a riving knife. I have a splitter, which means I'm going to have to remove the splitter in order to do this because it's going to be a non-through cut. I'm going to want a feather board to make sure things stay tight to the fence. Let's run a test cut. And that turned out good, so I'm going to proceed with making my cuts on my 5 pieces. And I'll just set the blade to the height that I need to remove that. And we got 4 good rabbets and 1 oops. I started this piece upside down before I caught it, and that's why you do an extra. This might be salvageable. I'm not 100% sure of the dimensions, but still, glad I did 5. Next, I mounted a 45-degree chamfering bit like this in my palm router, And I'm going to use that to make a chamfer along the inside edge of the frame stock. I bought this larger auxiliary base from Lee Valley, and I find for small pieces like this, I just like to turn it into like an impromptu mini router table, and that just keeps things nice and stable. Time for a quick change of plans. After getting the chamfer in place, we looked at things, and it was decided that this front edge of the picture frame needs to be thinner, almost half, again, thinner. And since we've already been cutting at the wood, that just makes things a little challenging to figure out. I'm going to use a dado blade on the table saw to get this done. This notch is about 1 inch wide, and your typical dado blade is going to do 3/4 of an inch and a little bit. So I'm just going to be loading up every single piece of the dado blade set, and even then we're probably going to have to take multiple passes. That's about 7/8 of an inch, which is not quite enough. For this cut, we're going to want the dado blade right up against the fence, so I'm going to use a sacrificial fence, which I'll clamp to my actual fence to protect it. And now we can bring this right up against it and in fact embed the blade in it if we need to. We got a pencil mark here for the height we want, and I'll bring the dado blade up to that pencil line. Turn the locking knob to lock it in place. I did the outside cut first, and now I'm going to reset the blade and do the inside cut. It's kind of arguable as to which one is safer. As I was doing this, I'm like, yeah, if I do any sort of twisting, things can get caught and get nasty. So this is one of these operations where if you're not comfortable with it, find another way to do it. I was very careful that I knew that I had to keep all my weight bearing on this and not on this. So as I was using the push block, I was keeping my weight on the outside edge. For the second cut, you can see how I have the blade actually embedded in the wood fence here so that you can cut right up to the edge of the workpiece. I'm going to cut my miters on the table saw using this mitering jig that I made several years ago. This was based on a Steve Ramsey video. It's a very simple design. This is at a 90-degree angle, so as long as you cut one of your 45s here, one 45 there, they will always match perfectly. If you're looking for a jig that has maybe more features, I'd look for the one by David Picciuto. I'll put links to both of these down below. Careful cutting and measuring, then I have these two pieces are the same length, and these two pieces are the same length. There we go. Time to get it clamped up. I'm trying not to sound like a shill, but even if you only do a frame once or twice a year, I really recommend you get one of these strap clamps. I don't care what brand you get. I'll put a link to this one down below. Now I'm sounding like a shill. And it just makes clamping up a frame so much easier. It's a little fiddly to get it set, but once you've got it set, you just crank this to tighten it up. And I forgot to push the button, so I missed putting the glue on and getting it lined up, but just you just need to make sure these corners are well lined up, and then I can tighten this down. Make sure it's square. And then we will just set this aside and let it be. And once this is all dry, we just take this off. And we got a picture frame, and it's now time for some. And I'm going to just take that little extra step. This glue is probably perfectly strong enough. It's not a big picture frame, but I'm going to reinforce the corners by cutting some splines. I've got this really simple little spline jig that I don't even remember when I made it. And it just rides over the table saw blade. And you put the picture in here, and it will cut a slot in the edge of the corner, and then we can reinforce that with some wood. Cuts a nice slot in each corner, and you can fit a little spline into there, which will make some nice reinforcement. This would be a good place to put a contrasting wood, but I'm going to use the same color maple because we're planning to stain this fairly dark. A little fiddling and that goes in there. Might need to smooth it just a little bit so there's room for the glue. We don't really need a whole lot. Just smear some glue in there. Let those dry for an hour and then we can move on. And in the meantime, I cut a piece of plywood to use as a backer board for the picture frame. This will go behind the print. Using a flush cutting saw to take these down. The request was for black, so we almost thought about spray painting it, but I kind of like having a little bit of wood grain showing through, so we're going with a ebony stain. This is a Minwax wood stain, penetrating stain, ebony number 2718. It does slow things down a fair bit because you have to wait like 8 hours before you can move on with putting a finish over top. Okay, this is a lot more on the gray side and a lot less on the black side. And here we go. And yeah, this is not what we're looking for. This is very much sort of a light gray sort of thing and not a really dark, which is what we wanted. As I was applying the stain, I was thinking about it and it's like maple is a very dense wood, so it just wasn't absorbing like I thought it should. And partly this is just what we want. So I'm gonna take this and I'm going to sand it a bit, and then I'm going to take it outside. I'm going to hit it with some black spray paint, and we'll come back after that. A little bit of this. There we go. So we got the frame, we got a backer board, we got the print, and a piece of cardboard to sit between the board and the print. Time to put this all together. Like that. If you're curious, this is a print by an artist named Grant Peckhoff, and I'm not sure I'm saying the name right because I don't really know anything about the guy. You see, earlier this year, my wife and I took an amazing Alaska cruise, and in Ketchikan, we went on this hike up into the mountains, hiking through a rainforest. There was water and streams and all that. And the next day, we came across this print in a gallery, and the print makes us think about that rainforest and, you know, reminds us of the cruise, and that's why we picked that up. I don't have specific picture framing hardware. What I tend to do is I just put a little hole like that, and then I put a tiny screw into the back, and that clamps this in. And I'll do that 3 more times. These are tiny 1/2-inch number 6 size screws. I do have these little hooks which I can attach to the side of the frame. And finally a little picture hanging wire. Just twist the wire around itself and that should be fine. And there we go. Started with an old broken down maple tabletop, salvaged some wood out of it, made a simple picture frame, got a nice memory to hang on the wall, and we spent some fun time together. We'll see you on the next one.